Dark Souls isn't hard. You're just bad, but it isn't your fault.
In an age of ancients, the world was unformed, shrouded by fog. A land of grey crags, arch trees and everlasting dragons. But then, there was fire, and with fire came disparity. Heat and cold, life and death, and of course light and dark. And from the dark they came, and found the souls of lords within the flame. Leto, the first of the dead. The Witch of Izalith, and the daughter of Chaos. Wynn, the Lord of Summer, and his faithful knights. And the furtive pygmy, so easily forgotten. With the strength of lords, they challenged the dragons. Wynn's mighty bolts peeled apart their stone scales. The witches weaved great firestorms. Leto unleashed a miasma of death and disease, and seethed the scales, betrayed his own, and the dragons were no more. Thus began the age of fire, but soon the flames will fade, and only dark will remain. Even now, there are only embers, and man sees not light, but only endless nights. And amongst the living are seen carriers of the accursed dark sign. Yes, indeed, the dark sign brands the undead, and in this land, the undead are corralled and led to the north, where they are locked away to the end of the world. This is your fate. Only in the ancient legends it stated that one day an undead shall be chosen to leave the undead asylum in pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords, Lordran.
Now more than ever, games want you to understand the process so that you, the player, is best equipped to take on all the challenges set out for the game. I remember as a child, Sly Cooper 3 being told the exact buttons to press for certain things, and that came out years, a whole 6 years before. Which means what's happening here is not a limitation, not a symbol of its times, but a design choice. This design choice is so prevalent in Souls gaming culture that it's defiantly upheld by vocal members of the community every time a new game is released, and I am subjected to the fans who think the games need to stay really hard, and others who want more accessible options, allowing a wider range of fans to partake in the game. So I'm here to blow all arguments out of the water. This game isn't hard, and accessibility is always great. When you ignore the angry mob on Twitter, some of the coolest Souls nerds I've ever met were on Twitch, always willing to share struggles, experiences, and funny builds they've created. Something Dark Souls does a poor job, and that is subjective of course, is that it doesn't hold your hand at the beginning with the systems that make a key difference. The first area does a good job of giving you a core gameplay look. Here's some traversal, here are some enemies, with the punishment being a small walk back if you fail. But this is how you hit, roll, and I will say the parry timing is odd, but as soon as you realise it's on contact with you and not the shield, it all begins to come together. And of course, a boss. It shocked me how it just threw me in, resulting in a quick and first death. I pressed the wrong button! Well, that's the first death. And I could say that's not good, but several bosses barely give you a moment through the fog wall, so the tutorial is at least indicative of the game you're going to be playing. Now, with what I've said and the title, you might think I'm not being consistent, but I have to give the game credit where it's due, and the initial area is good. However, I personally feel the difficulty doesn't come from a lack of understanding on how to fight. Before we go any further, please consider dropping a like and subscribing, and a special shout out to the Patreon supporters. More information at the end of the video. In a more modern scenario, or at least forgiving one, there would be a blacksmith in this world. And you would get the lowdown on how to upgrade gear, because this is where I think a lot of difficulties lie for the average player. the weapon and how important it is to have it upgraded. It's almost like the tough reputation of the game reinforces this mindset of not knowing. Well, everyone said it was hard, so it's only normal that it takes 100 hits to take down this boss. All of this feeds the mindset that builds that guy on Twitter who walked up the hill both ways in the snow without shoes and before cars were even invented. Meanwhile, my playthrough was very different. Imagine, if you will, there's another hill, but instead of walking, I was there in a 4x4 with seat warmers, and that's not generational wealth, but a mindset you must approach these games with. That was my way of saying it isn't your fault you're bad at Dark Souls, because you're meant to be. So many games nowadays cross-pollinate skills. It almost feels normal to go from game to game with shared skills, and that will get you most of the way. You could argue that's what's made Elden Ring so popular. Mechanics Dark Souls 1 revolutionized have become more and more common in the game space. That even those shared skills now cover Souls games with the ever-expanding Souls-like genre. And may explain why I had an easier time, because a lot of the mechanics I've been introduced to came to me via another game. Your standard Souls experience feels so well known at this point that it's often called the Souls formula, springing up a huge plethora of Souls-inspired games, even spinning off further, creating the Souls-like genre. So what makes these games stand out from the rest, and how does it shape the player experience? Die, 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 and die again. Whether you die to an enemy boss, traps, falling, getting lost, slowly beaten down, or PvP, there are many ways you will lose those precious souls or progress made when playing Dark Souls 1. In my playthrough, I died 150 times. That's right, I did a pie chart and here's the numbers. I died 3 times to PvP, 20 times to falling, 72 times to minions, 3 times to traps, and 52 times to bosses, 2 of which were mandatory. So before this impassioned video comes across as I'm better than the average gamer, I can assure you that I am not. One thing to notice here though, is that bosses made up only 34.7% of the deaths, and outside looking in, I was expecting the vast majority of these deaths to be tough bosses, but that is clearly not the case. One thing I was really not expecting was just how much of the Souls experience is a slow whittle down of your health and potions. Every hit you take, every potion you drink, and every dead end you go down in the hopeful task of finding a bonfire closer to your goal is the quintessential experience. Slowly but surely, you will fall, whether you run out of potions, get poisoned, cursed, or follow terrible advice from one of the notes on the floor. That's the reason why I died more to mobs, whether it's frustration from running through too much, a long walk to the boss, or me not finding a bonfire. All attribute to that count that isn't a boss fight, and I was expecting it to be at least 60% bosses minimum. Now, more than ever, in the online space we hear that game developers, publishers, and even shareholders, if they have a clue what's going on, want you the player to be able to finish the game. How hard can we make this to keep the player engaged, but also not so easy that it feels like a snooze fest? And for online games, this is known as skill-based matchmaking. But if we think that kind of mindset is not used in games as a whole, then that would be folly. Where am I going with this? Well, the Souls games have a reputation for doing none of that, and they are willing for you to get frustrated, stubborn, and even angry. But this does make you wonder if the issues come from the player, the community, the developer, or none, because it's perfect. I should stop this slander now. And it is worth noting how I just said it does a good intro for the fighting and general core gameplay. The community at large, or should I preface the vocal part of the community, say these games are tough, and it's through these tough experiences that we are bonded together. Now, imagine you're a new player. You don't know anyone who plays the game. Somehow, so when you undoubtedly hit your first wall, hitting bosses for 40 damage out of 3000 health, it is easy to see how the new player thinks, oh, this is the experience I'm meant to be having. Something I think needs addressing, at least for Dark Souls 1, is that the Souls experience to me only represents the beginning half of the game. Don't get me wrong, there are moments later on, but those come from a separate host of issues as a whole, and I generally found the later half of the game pretty easy. Which is ironic, because I am one of those players that loves a tough experience. I like to get stubborn and feel the euphoria, and when I push past that barrier, you would think this was made for me. This could be as simple as, when you hear something enough, you go in with a certain expectation. It's like playing a terrible game, knowing it's terrible, so you are almost more forgiving of its flaws, or at least see the funny side of it. For me, I was expecting to get pounded. I mean, grinded. Oh, god damn it. I thought it was going to be a hard time, okay? A game seemingly designed for masochists, knowledge gate-kept by players to make sure that you also walked up the hill both ways, and don't get me wrong, there are definitely elements of the game you have to experience without someone telling you. Something like me after the Gaping Dragon. Imminent hidden path. Ew. I feel that's bait. The 9 humanity and 30k souls give me anxiety. Yeah, I don't actually know like where I'm meant to go now. If I really need to, I'll just spend a homeward bone though. But I don't want to lose all the progress I've made in distance. Oh, do I go that way? Do I just commit? The biggest thing that made a difference to my playthrough was if I hit an enemy and it did barely a fraction of damage, I understood that as the game telling me, go back, you're not ready, be it gear or levels. Oh, I'm not meant to be here. Yeah, I'm just kind of exploring, just kind of vibing. Oh! Oh! Yeah, I did no damage. That's usually my sign up in the wrong area. 24! But I want to get to the elephant in the room, when some of you see the weapon I used to finish the game. It's a numbers game, and to back up the points I know will happen to me, I'm going to be going over a bunch of different things, but hear me out. I ended up using the Black Knight Halberd, and before I hear all the angry gamers saying, well, no wonder you thought it was easy. I used it because I like Guan Yu, and for all my sins, I'm a Dynasty Warriors fan. In fact, feel free to check out my last video about that. While this isn't one of those videos where I showcase the stats of every single weapon, however, it is one of those videos where I thought, let's look at some of the numbers. I have broken many weapons down via the following: damage with no upgrades, damage with maximum upgrades, stat scaling, to which I selected the strongest of the stats, and how hard it is to obtain the weapon, because trust me, it's important to the discussion at hand. If you grab a basic starter broadsword, you get a base damage of 82. The maximum this can be upgraded to is a plus 15, with 205 damage and a scaling of C. Generally speaking, unless the scaling is higher than C, it isn't worth building a character around. That damage sounds okay, but I can hear you already. Ting, not everyone has made a spreadsheet to compare the numbers, so let's compare that to one of the most used, powerful weapons that made me create this whole thing to make the point. The Black Knight Halberd starts at 245 damage, finishing at a mighty 367 at a plus 5. This is equivalent of your normal plus 15, as it technically starts at a 5, and each twinkling upgrade counts as 2, so don't let the number confuse you. Thank you, Reddit. The scaling is a meager D/E, but looking at those numbers, it's easy to see why it's so good. And seen as a, quote, overpowered weapon, to get this, you kill a Black Knight that wields a halberd, and you have a 10% chance to obtain it per run. Not per life, not per save file. Because once he's dead, he's dead. So safe to say, it's a pretty rare weapon. It is also worth noting that in a Dark Souls 1 speedrun, it's pretty common where if the player does not get the Black Knight Halberd, they will just reset the run. Now, my theory is because you haven't got to worry about stat scaling, you just go for the weapon with the raw damage numbers. No need to worry about levels, no need to worry about stats, just give me the numbers, baby. How about the poster boy of better weapons? What if I told you one of the best weapons is available really early on and has a damage that can almost rival the halberd? The Spy Handler. Starting at 130 damage, ending at 325 plus 15 with a scaling of C. And here is the best part. You can find it at the graveyard next to Firelink Shrine. Now hopefully that puts everything into perspective. The Black Knight Halberd is still a better weapon, but look at that, and it's something you're guaranteed to get every single run. Before I list off a bunch of other stats on weapons that validate my clearly biased opinion on how I just played the game as intended, and that's why it's not difficult, a willingness to realize what you're doing isn't working. On a couple occasions I went back to change weapons or try something new. The weapons I went through, not including the broken one of course, was a broadsword, a lito, and a lightning spear. Something that can be heavily utilized is the parry system. I won a bunch of fights I had no right to because I got a good parry off. An interesting conversation I had with a viewer, and I do know their name, but in case they don't want it shared, I'll keep it out. A lot of the difficulty and confusion they have seen comes from people who are afraid or refuse to switch from a weapon they're using. Reminds me of the phrase, better the devil you know. Weird phrases aside, your old weapon is just sitting there anyway. You can always switch back. It is also worth noting just how easy it is to obtain upgrades for your weapons. For the lower level, you can just simply buy them for souls off of the blacksmith. And at the very beginning, souls will seem like a rare commodity. But obviously, as time goes on, this is not the case. Other upgrades can be either purchased or easily farmed. So there really is an incentive to try something out until you find what works for you. Some players are going as far as Anor Londo with a low upgraded broadsword. And I'm not talking about a challenge run here. But this all goes back to the reputation this game has. People are expecting a tough time, so when something takes a while to fall, it doesn't get questioned. This game doesn't hold your hand and tell you, and the community sets an expectation. So if that is all you hear, then no wonder players are having a tough time and quitting. This is, and I quote, from Reddit. You also need to know how much benefit you're getting from the scaling, based on the value of your stat. This is called saturation. At 99 of any given stat, you have 100% saturation, i.e. you have 100% of the bonus damage you could also get from anything that scales with that stat. Not all weapons have the same rate of saturation. Divine, occult, magic, and enchanted weapons saturate more slowly than plus 15 or unique weapons. Talismans and catalysts have diverse saturation rates, making certain ones better than others at various levels of faith. This is why Canvas Talismans are better than Dark Moon Talismans at 30 faith, but at 50 faith, Dark Moon Talismans are better. Each letter represents a scaling grade, and each scaling grade covers a range of possible scaling coefficients. From the best to worst, there are E, 1 through 20%, D, 21 through 50%, C, 51 through 80, B, 81 through 100, A, 101 through 140, and S, 141 plus %. Different stats scale up different damage types. If a weapon scales with a given stat, then that stat will increase only the damage of its respective types. Strength and dex affect physical damage. Intelligence, magic damage. Faith affects magic and lightning damage, and no stat affects fire. This is based off humanity. Now that you know all of that, here's the equation for the weapon's attack rating after bonus damage from scaling. The total attack rating equals the base attack rating plus the base attack rating scaling coefficient and saturation value. For more than one scaling stat, you have the total attack rating equals the base attack rating plus the base attack rating scaling coefficient 1 and the saturation value of that stat, plus the base attack rating of the scaling coefficient 2 and the saturation value 2. For more than one damage type, just use this equation for each damage type. An example, the Man Serpent Greatsword at plus 15 at 40 strength. It has a base attack rating of 275, has a strength scaling coefficient of 1.05, 40 strength gives it a saturation value of 0.85. The total attack rating is 275 plus 245. That gives it a total attack rating of 520. Just for context. Then we have the Claymore at plus 15, 40 strength, 40 dex, has a base attack rating of 257, has a scaling coefficient of 0.61 for both strength and dex, giving it a saturation value of 0.85, so it's 257 plus 257, and then another one with 257 plus 267. So either way, it is a lot of damage The important clarification is that if this wasn't posted by a guy on Reddit 12 years ago, I would never know how these stats work for the game. On the chance this video makes the rounds, I will share the link to this post because credit where it is due, it was extremely helpful and proof that not everyone wants you to suffer because they did. Stat saturation, you can get a rough idea of how this works because quite simply put, as you up the stats while you level, you see what is directly affected before you reach it. So the damage number no longer goes up, you can safely move on to another stat. I was going to play this game again with multiple weapons for the sole purpose of saying, look, it's possible without the Black Knight Halberd, but this has made it very clear. It is easy with several other weapons equal to or much stronger than what I used. And to name a few, you could rock the Great Scythe, the Spy Handler, Demon's Great Axe, the Uchikatana, the Murakamo, any other Black Knight weapon, the Dragon Tooth, Man Serpent Greatsword, Demon Great Machete, Moonlight Greatsword, the Life Hunt Scythe, and these are just some of the ones I looked into. The reality is if you're within a range of the power I had, you will absolutely crush this game. This community has spawned an insane number of memes where your playthrough is invalid if you do a number of things, from the weapon you use, whether you do it blindfolded, without sitting at bonfires, if you skip minions, if you level up, if you so much as breathe once during the 30 hours of your playthrough, you experience a vocal minority who will claim this is no longer the Souls experience. Map design, the true boss that made me want to throw myself into the abyss. Early on, you learn that everything is a maze upon itself. The key philosophy here is to remember all the routes you went down, because if you do not, you will struggle. There are two areas in particular where I struggled the most. From what I was told, the sentiment is shared. Blight Town. If you're a new player like myself, that is the name you will know. Older players have coined the term Lag Town because the original version was incredibly laggy. Now this is relevant because partly why this area is so hard to navigate is also why it dropped in frame rate. This area is long and full of verticality. Words, unfortunately, that have never been used to describe myself. But when you make it through here, there are a myriad of enemies to either whittle your health down, poison you, force you to make risky jumps, and so many more ways of losing those precious early game souls. And while there are bonfires dotted around the area to save some of the progress you've made, it is a section of the game that enforces the stubbornness you need much more than any boss you'll ever encounter this entire game. While this place was an absolute mess and near my least favourite place to be in the entire game, it is home to one of the most satisfying moments and cements a core mechanic. After multiple hours of grueling, slow progress and many deaths, I hit this moment. Aha! Where does this lead to? Where does this go? Where does this go? Where does this go? Wait, I recognize this music. That requires some celebration cake, my friends. This is yet more and more examples of no matter how long you explore it, almost always loop back to somewhere important. The euphoria I felt was actually better than most bosses I beat in this entire game. And if you were to tell me that before I jumped into this game, I would have said you were lying. This could mean two things. The area was so bad that when it ended, I felt finally free of the pain, like when Gollum gets the ring right before he tumbles off a cliff. Or this was a gauntlet designed to whistle out anyone who wasn't committed to the cause. I really struggled to come up with the second one. It's clearly the formal reason this place sucks. Funnily enough though, because there is some semblance of order, I do think it's possible to beat Blight Town eventually. For some reason, the area I struggled with the most was the archive. My tiny brain took such a long time to figure out where to go, I essentially tracked over the same area again and again and again. But here is something you will notice. I'm talking about map design, but where I'm having these issues is just two areas. Outside of Blight Town and the archive, I had little to no issues going from point A to point B. Most branching paths are obvious enough for you to remember and get back to at a later moment. It is satisfying, full of challenges, and even the enemies dotted around act as a key marker. There is a turning here because the last time I saw it I was ambushed by these thieves, or this weird bush came alive, and so on. Not all areas are a labyrinth, and some are even fairly linear. My favourite area to play and explore, however, was the first main zone, or Anor Londo, for its grand scale, genuinely a joy to be in both playing and aesthetically. It is also home to one of the best bosses coined as the Twins. I don't want this video to come across as bashing it for the sake of it, although I didn't enjoy my time playing, merely the experience I had with the expectations going in. But I want to bring us back to Blighttown and address what I feel is an elephant in the room, and that is my privilege. This isn't me talking about the fact I have straight white male privilege, but a streamer one. And you might say, what does that mean? This isn't about being sent keys or having a chat that's willing to help or hinder me depending on the mood they're in, but it's a matter of time. I have more time to game than the average person, and that is something that benefits me greatly when it comes to this kind of game. I am married, I have 2 dogs, and I work a few part-time jobs as a means in which to supplement what I do with content creation. This means I can throw 20 to 30 hours a week playing games 5 hours at a time. This isn't some kind of lifestyle flex, but a reality to this means that if I get stuck, I can throw my head at a wall long enough to figure out, or just brute force my way through a problem. We have all had an experience that is exactly like this. You play a game, you get stuck for a while, you get frustrated, give up, and 3 months later, you finally boot the game back up and instantly get past whatever it was. And then you think to yourself, what was I stuck on? How was I stuck? Now imagine you have 5 hours of near uninterrupted gaming time. The only thing getting in the way is your addiction to tea, coffee, and your tiny bladder, and yes, it's a vicious cycle. Suddenly, you're less likely to drop a game or reach a point where you would have put it away for a few months. You will always figure it out with enough time. And if you haven't, the sheer fact people are watching you process it in real time will compel you to carry on when you would normally give up. Back when I had less time in general for gaming because I wasn't streaming, the amount of time I would dedicate to a single player game because it was much more of a social thing for me, I would be lucky if I managed 5 hours a week. So by that logic, assuming I never quit, I would have taken past 6 whole weeks to beat Dark Souls 1 as opposed to my actual 1.5. Essentially, this is a disclaimer that as a content creator, I have to accept that my experience with games in general is different to yours, whether I like it or not. And that was based on my gaming time as an adult. Younger me would have absolutely done an all-nighter on certain games, but there is no point pretending anyone younger than the age of 20 would be watching my potentially multi-hour video on Dark Souls 1. Some common misconceptions. All bosses are difficult, minus some BS. The way to look at these fights is one big memorization, learning the slow timing of hits. In fact, it's better to compare it all to a choreographed dance. So long as you can turn that zug-zug part of your brain off, you will have no issues at the beginning. But turn it back on at the end because you'll have a great weapon now, thanks to the maths that we broke down earlier. If you pay attention to the enemy's health and moveset as it adapts, you will be fine. That does apply more to Artorias than anything else because it's a later Souls thing, but it tracks here too. You can, though, brute force your way through all of them eventually, again reinforcing our point earlier. Every time a Souls game is released, I'm subjected to yet another debate of accessibility in video games, in particular anything made by From Software. And something I do not want to be conflated is how I define accessibility. I should be able to enable a number of color filters through colorblind settings, completely hotkeyable so I can change the controls and plug in any controller, that's really important. Numerous audio settings and visual settings such as high contrast mode. Those I feel should be available in every game providing the developer has the time and the resources to enact it. This conversation often takes a different turn, changing the definition that all games must be beatable in the names of accessibility. And there's something that could be said that allowing everyone to experience something you designed could be desirable. And whether or not someone turned this on story mode or max difficulty, like I did for the Fallen Order video, Great one, by the way, go check it out. The key difference here, though, this isn't a story game. This feeling of shared camaraderie can only be felt to some if they know you had the exact same experience as them, which for many is an upside or downside to those in the gaming community. I personally don't care how you beat the game, but I think it'd be unfair to discount just how many people liked that due to these rigid settings everyone had a roughly similar experience, especially at the start of the game. With Souls games' main story having much more of a backseat, it can be understandable why you wouldn't just let someone through easy settings one-hit their way through every boss. But that also assumes most people won't just put it on normal, so I feel regardless there'll be plenty of comrades to go around. A more modern example of accessibility is what Final Fantasy XVI did, allowing you to equip rings that would auto-parry, auto-dodge, and so on, meaning you could simply press square and win a fight. But another important distinction is that it is a story game, and my overall thoughts on that discussion is that obviously my opinion isn't as relevant because I'm able to play these games as they were intended without any of these settings. If it wasn't abundantly clear already, I believe that most, if not all people can beat Dark Souls 1 with enough time, and the reason I say most is because not everyone will want to. I think it'd be silly for me to make a video on this and talk about this game and community without getting anyone from there to have a say. So I asked 3 very different Souls players 6 questions, and here are their answers. What is a common misconception the Souls series has, in particular Dark Souls 1? A common misconception is that they are very difficult. To me, Souls games are like any fighting game where you can't just pick up a controller and be good. You have to put in some time to develop skills you'll need to play that game. Once you have them, the game becomes pretty trivial. It's why later Souls games have more unfair hit-on-arrival mechanics, at least I think that's what HOA means, because the veteran players already have the skills developed to play the game. That the game's obtuse and doesn't tell you anything. If you pay attention, it's fine and quite linear. Part of what makes Souls such an enduring and well-known series is that the community has been researching every corner of the game constantly. Challenge runs, speed runs, randomizers, PvP, lore theorists, every bit of the game matters to someone, and if it somehow doesn't, Illusory Wall will dissect it anyways. So given that, I'd say the most common misconception is something common across gaming. The idea that all new players need that knowledge to properly experience the game. Failure is a part of the game, and a little bit of persistence and armor can take even the most clueless to victory. That and all the misinformation spread by FXtraLife being a trash site. Is Dark Souls worthy of its reputation as a difficult game? Dark Souls is worthy of its reputation for being difficult when you talk about it compared to the time it came out. Today, most people can beat Dark Souls 1, but when it first came out, it was using mechanics that no one was really acclimated for yet. Yes and no. The design of Dark Souls is hard, intentionally so, but if you meet the game on its level and engage with it the way the game wants you to, everything will click. Not at all. Souls games are hard because they are different. Modern game design loves the idea of creating the feeling of close calls while avoiding player failure as much as possible. Souls are willing to put pitfalls in the main path and sit back while the player has all the pressure to get themselves out of the situation. People will crawl out the pit with their bare hands and call it hard despite there being stairs and ladders all around the world for them to use. This is antagonistic design, but creating real problems is what gives players the satisfaction of real problem solving. The get good requirements are much lower than advertised, and there are always multiple tools available to counter the hard. If you're willing to search around and practice what works for you, simply understanding how to upgrade your weapon solves a significant amount of Dark Souls 1. Literal pits in platformers rate much harder for me than any of these figurative pits. What is something you recommend all new Souls players do? Try lots of different weapons at the start and invest in your life total. The weapons have different movesets, so I tend to view them like fighting game characters. You'll need to play around with a few to find the one that calls to you. Read everything. Make sure you know what all your stats actually mean before you start throwing levels into stuff. Then find a build and stick to it. Don't spend like 3/4 of the game leveling strength and then suddenly pivot. Get some HP. It never feels like a big difference when you look at a single level, but it builds up fast and gives the wiggle room to experiment and learn more effectively. But don't be afraid to lose all that HP getting a shiny. It's not a failure if you keep the loot. What is your favorite build for Dark Souls 1? My favourite build on Dark Souls 1 is an early game gold tracer. You'll need the DLC to get it, but it's easy to do at a very low soul level. Curved swords are all really good, but the gold tracer in particular will melt most low level players even when they're blocking with great shields. I tend to use halberds in all of the games though. Pure dexterity, Uchikatana, Grasscrest shield, Dragon Slayer's armor. Across the genre, I'm always most comfortable with strength builds. Bigger weapons with fewer swings simplify the game plan as much as possible to make solving fights simpler and faster. Flinching or knocking over non-boss enemies is very powerful. It doesn't matter how much HP an NPC or elite enemy has if they are never standing up to do anything. And options tend to be much more plentiful and harder to miss for melee than for mages. However, in Dark Souls 1 specifically, there's actually a dex weapon that plays the one big swing playstyle better than any strength weapons for me. The Life Hunt Scythe boss weapon from the crossbreed Priscilla. Needing to waste a ring slot on Bleed Bite Ring is not optimal, but being able to basically max the weapon before the twins and a faster moveset than comparable strength options make it my cozy build. If you could change anything about Dark Souls 1, what would it be? If I could change anything about Dark Souls 1, I would make half the final boss's moves unable to parry. I would make some of the branching paths more obvious. The 3 areas locked behind placing the Lord Vessel and their bosses are all noticeably lower quality than the iconic first half of the game. I'm not sure what I'd do to fix them, but I have stopped many of my playthroughs after clearing out the rest of the world and beating the twins. My build feels complete, and the remaining content has its own gimmicks that are independent of build anyways, so it's not worth the replay. What is the most underrated part of Dark Souls 1? The Dark Souls franchise has become pretty popular. I don't think any of it is underrated anymore. People know it's all good stuff, if anything. I would say how good blocking with a shield actually is, and most parts people struggle with become trivial if you just equip a shield. The sound design. It makes the world feel so tragic. Tangent. I hate the phrasing underrated. People are allowed to have their opinions and rate stuff how they feel based on things they care about, especially when talking about something that gets so much attention. But the aspect that often gets unfairly overshadowed, fighting stuff in games is fun. A lot of work went into making the moment-to-moment satisfying and enjoyable. It's not just flashy and fluid power fantasy flavor of satisfying. And not everyone will agree with me that running around bonking undead with a stick is an enjoyable time, but it's an important foundation of why I replay and enjoyed learning more about the series. When I told you I found 3 very different players, I bet you doubted me, but we have some amazing diverse opinions, builds and thoughts on Dark Souls as a whole. Have you noticed how all of them love using a different weapon? Well, that brings me to my next point. Dark Souls at its very core is a much more fun game when we put aside this facade of it's the most difficult game ever, and instead think, how can I challenge myself by trying a different build? Not a difficult build, a different build. It is obvious the developers also intended this. How often have you heard someone say, I'm on New Game Plus 7? I wonder how many of those players used one weapon that whole time. And why would you? Even now, I went from going to play this game again to prove the fan base wrong to, I wonder what I could try next. There are so many challenges we have seen, so many valiant and skilled gamers achieve, from no death, no hits, level 1. No healing, broken sword only, no equipment, ranged only, daggers only, and so many more. A game that is very hard to beat will not have so many different challenges. These are clearly difficult, but it shows with knowledge and practice you can achieve an insane number of possibilities even in a game such as this. I feel it would be wrong of me to not cover at least one piece of my favourite lore which I absolutely adore about this game, and that is the lore of Artorias. I have to clarify, I may get a lot of names wrong, and I apologise now. Artorias was one of the 4 Knights of Gwyn, alongside Dragonslayer Ornstein, Hawkeye Gao, and Lord Blades Chiron. He gained the ability of abyss walking in New Londo. He eventually went back to his homeland of Ulasil to protect it from the encroaching abyss, where he eventually falls in battle fighting Manus. The reason he moves the way he does is because he gave up his shield to protect Sif, who at the time was a puppy. So his left arm got destroyed, and then he eventually gets corrupted by the Abyss, which is where you the player find him in the arena. Despite being corrupted, he still somewhat remembers his goal of slaying creatures from the Abyss. The whole Artorias of the Abyss DLC takes place in the past, some unknown amount of years before the main game. and Sif is the only one alive in the present who knows of the chosen undead's role in preserving his master's honor, which, if you do the DLC before fighting Sif for some reason, he reacts differently to you. Not angry about you defiling Artorias' grave, but recognizes you and understands why you're there seeking the right of Abyss walking, to finish what Artorias started. To say this story was both amazing and incredibly sad was an understatement. The game tells you very little, but once I had this lore explained to me, it very quickly became my favourite. After all, I have dogs, and you're damn right I'd give my shield to protect them. And then imagining them watching over the grave all those years protecting it, combined with the limping of our dear Sif mid-fight, makes you feel like you've been punched in the gut. I was talking about the shared camaraderie earlier, in saying players want to have the same challenges and hurdles, but the story and lore takes a complete opposite approach. You can either dive headfirst, reading everything and anything, and then move your obsession to hour-long videos on YouTube, or you can ignore it entirely and just fight as many bosses as possible. And if you ask me, they did it the right way, because it feels like you're discovering a whole new layer that adds so much more complexity to the world, and that is simply because you are. So to cap it all off, Dark Souls isn't hard, you're just bad, was a clickbaity way of saying, with time, patience, and a willingness to learn, you too will find Dark Souls easy and a much more enjoyable experience as a whole. If for some reason you want to see me suffer more, when this video comes out, I will be playing Dark Souls 2 for the first time live on my Twitch channel. A massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who keep this channel going, and you can support from only £1 a month, with the link in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day.